The first time someone called me a mistake, I was 7 years old and hiding behind my grandmother's couch. My aunt had whispered it to another woman at a birthday party, her voice sharp and confident, as if facts could slice skin. I didn't cry, but I didn't forget either. By the time I turned 24, I had learned to wear my silence like armor and smile through glass. I thought I'd left all that behind when I met Ethan. Before I continue narrating the story of Norah, please consider giving this video a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. He was everything my past wasn't: charming, calm, and from a family that seemed wrapped in cashmere warmth. Our first date was all sunlight and bookstores, his laugh low and real in a way that made me feel seen. He held doors, remembered the name of my dog, and once mailed me a letter just to say he liked the way I said Tuesday. Ethan worked in real estate, had clean nails and a future mapped out in tidy bullet points. It felt like I was stepping into a movie until the credits refused to roll. We got married within 9 months, a simple civil ceremony with just 2 witnesses and a promise to have a proper celebration later. Ethan's mother, Lorraine, sent a gift basket with a handwritten card that said, "Welcome to the family," underlined twice. I'd never met her in person, but Ethan assured me she'd warm up once she got to know me. His sister, Cassandra, didn't send anything at all. That should have been my first clue. The house was a 3-bedroom colonial, with ivy crawling up the brick like it belonged there. Lorraine had bought it for Ethan as a graduation gift and rented it to us for $1 a year. Every wall smelled like lavender and control. She had decorated it years ago and warned me not to change anything without checking in. I nodded politely and repainted the kitchen anyway. Ethan didn't notice the color change until a week later. He laughed when I told him, and kissed the tip of my nose like it was some kind of harmless rebellion. "You'll love her once you get to know her," he said, which wasn't the same as saying she'd love me. Still, I tried. I wore neutral sweaters to dinner and asked about her garden club. Lorraine was always polite, but it was the kind of politeness that made you feel small, like a thank you note signed with a sneer. She smiled with her mouth, not her eyes. And when I told her I was pregnant, her silence was so complete, I thought the phone had disconnected. "That's sooner than expected," she finally said. And I knew right then I'd made another mistake. Ethan didn't say much that night. He rubbed his temples and said something about timing, and his commission structure being unpredictable lately. "We'll figure it out," I said, and he nodded like he'd already started drafting an exit plan. I thought we were stronger than that. But it turns out love can only carry so much weight before the cracks show. Cassandra dropped by a few days later, uninvited, holding an iced latte and a box of designer baby clothes still in their boutique wrapping. "You're brave," she said, sipping loudly. "A baby this soon? Hope you're ready to give up your body and your brain." I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. She didn't laugh back. After she left, I stood in the nursery to be, staring at the pristine box. Inside were 3 onesies, all white with tiny embroidered letters. "Little Legacy." It didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a warning. I put the box in the closet and closed the door. The weeks passed like slow storms. Ethan grew distant, buried in work, always tired, always on his way out. Lorraine called more often, but never asked how I was doing, only how Ethan was holding up. I stopped trying to be heard. Some silences aren't worth breaking. When I was 16, I sprained my ankle falling down the church steps, and my mother didn't look up from her crossword puzzle. "Walk slower next time," she said. I thought I'd escaped all that when I married Ethan. But pain doesn't change just because it wears better clothes. Sometimes the echoes just come with better wallpaper. The night before it happened, Ethan came home smelling like scotch and woodsy cologne I didn't wear. He kissed my cheek like a stranger. "We need to talk," he said, but didn't. Instead, he went to bed, and I folded laundry like it mattered. My hands shook the entire time. The next morning was normal in the way horror movies always start normal. I made coffee, toasted a bagel, and fed the dog. Ethan left without saying goodbye. Lorraine called to say she'd be over in the afternoon to check on things, which really meant to inspect. I put on mascara anyway. When she arrived, I was halfway up the stairs with a basket of clean towels. The dog barked once and then went quiet. Lorraine's heels echoed on the hardwood like gunshots. "Don't forget to fold those properly," she called. I paused for just 1 second too long, then I felt it. A forceful shove between my shoulder blades. Time split. Towels flew. My belly twisted mid-air, and then I was tumbling down the stairs. Each step felt like a betrayal. My back struck something hard, then soft, then hard again. I landed in a pile of fabric and fear. My vision blurred, my mouth opened, but no sound came. Upstairs, Lorraine's voice didn't call for help, just for silence. "I told you not to carry heavy things," she muttered from the landing. My body screamed, but my voice stayed locked inside. I curled around my stomach like instinct, not strategy. Then everything went dark, cold, hard, silent. I woke up in a sterile hospital room with an IV in my arm and no one in the chair beside me. A nurse with kind eyes checked my chart and smiled. "Your baby's heartbeat is strong," she said. "You're lucky." I didn't feel lucky. I felt erased. The doctor came in next, asked me what happened. I lied. Said I slipped. Said I'd been careless. He nodded, made notes, didn't press. I stared at the ceiling and saw Lorraine's face. Not shocked, not worried, just annoyed, like I'd ruined her clean floors. Ethan hadn't come to the hospital. I asked the nurse to turn off the lights. The next day I went home with painkillers and printed instructions. Ethan was on a work call when I walked in. "You should have been more careful," he said, then added, "Mom's upset." I nodded. I'd stopped listening days ago. That night I packed a bag. I didn't leave that night. I needed more than a suitcase and a bruise. I needed silence. I needed time. I needed to disappear the right way. So I waited. I started by memorizing their routines, every errand and every call, even the timing of Lorraine's tea. Cassandra always went jogging at 6 p.m. sharp, wearing wireless earbuds and smugness. Ethan had 3 drinks before bed and unlocked his phone at least twice an hour, never noticing me glancing at his screen from across the room. I became invisible by design, moving like dust in their world of pristine surfaces. They thought I was broken. I left subtle traps, nothing dangerous, just enough to see if they noticed. A drawer left open by half an inch. A spoon moved to the wrong side of the sink. Ethan's favorite shirt folded with a perfect crease down the front instead of the back. No one said anything. Either they didn't notice or they didn't care. Both answers told me everything I needed to know. I reactivated an old email account I hadn't used in years, one tied to a version of me they'd never met. Through that account, I contacted a woman named Raina, a friend from college who ran a private shelter network for women needing to vanish. She didn't ask for details, just dates, documents, and where I could be picked up safely. I gave her the alley behind the bakery, 3 blocks from our house. In the days that followed, I built my escape in pieces. 1 pack of diapers here, a small stash of cash there, a burner phone hidden inside a box of oatmeal. I left coded notes to myself under magazine clippings taped inside my closet. My steps became rehearsals. Even the way I held my toothbrush was quieter, cleaner, practiced. I was turning my life into a performance they couldn't see through. Ethan started staying out later. Cassandra claimed she was looking out for me, but started asking strange questions about my schedule and whether I had friends nearby. Lorraine didn't look me in the eye anymore. The tension was silent but sharp. I played dumb and smiled often. On a rainy Thursday, Ethan left his laptop unlocked in the living room while he showered. I moved like a shadow and copied every email that mentioned me, every message to his mother, every bank transfer to accounts I'd never seen before. There were records of conversations about options, medical consultations, and phrases like termination window. My name wasn't in all of them, but it didn't need to be. They thought the problem would go away quietly. I wasn't quiet anymore. The next day, I took my dog, Milo, for a walk and stashed my backup USB in the bottom of a donation bin 2 blocks away. Inside the folder were photos of my bruises, the hospital discharge papers, Lorraine's voice in a recorded message saying, "You should have been more careful." Every file was labeled and time-stamped. Raina told me to keep backups in 3 separate locations. I kept 5. Lorraine asked me the next evening why I wasn't smiling lately. I shrugged and said I was tired. Cassandra told me she had a prenatal yoga class. One should join, even though she knew I could barely walk straight from the pain in my hip. Ethan brought home decaf coffee and said it was a treat. I threw it away after he left the room. I chose Sunday. The house would be empty by 10. Church for Lorraine, brunch for Cassandra, and golf for Ethan. I'd already told them I had a prenatal appointment, which none of them offered to attend. That morning, I made eggs, left the bed neat, and brushed Milo until his coat shone. I kissed his forehead. Then I walked out the back door and never looked back. Raina met me in a dusty gray sedan with 2 baby car seats in the back and a car seat base ready for mine. "You got everything?" she asked, eyes scanning the street. I nodded, my duffel bag held tight like it could keep me upright. The wind was cold against my teeth, but I smiled anyway. Freedom tastes like metal before it becomes relief. The safe house wasn't really a house. It was a second-floor apartment above a laundromat, with peeling paint and a window that stuck when it rained. But it had clean sheets, a working fridge, and a lock only I had the key to. I shared the building with 2 other women who never asked for names. One had a child already, the other was still in her second trimester like me. We spoke with kindness and caution. Milo curled up beside me every night on the mattress on the floor. He never left my side, not even when I cried quietly into the blanket, mourning the parts of me I'd left behind. I talked to my unborn daughter every morning. Told her stories about stars and why trees bend in wind but don't break. I told her we were safe. After 2 weeks, Raina brought a woman named Cleo who helped me change my name legally in another state. "You're not running," Cleo said. "You're reclaiming." I nodded but didn't believe her yet. I was still learning what it meant to belong to myself again. We chose the name Norah Elise Hart. Clean, simple, unconnected. I didn't recognize it at first when she handed me the new documents. But when I said it aloud for the first time, something in my chest loosened. I was becoming real again. I started sewing to keep my hands busy. Cleo gave me a second-hand machine and scraps from her cousin's upholstery shop. I made small things. Baby blankets, headbands, a pillowcase for the lumpy couch in the apartment. It reminded me I could still create. I wasn't just surviving. I was building. Milo barked only once the entire month we lived there. It was late, nearly midnight, and someone knocked on the apartment door without warning. We froze. Cleo grabbed a baseball bat. The knocking stopped after a minute, and we waited in silence for what felt like hours. It wasn't them. Raina confirmed the next morning that no one had followed my trail. "You did good," she said, pouring me coffee that tasted like strength. "They think you slipped. They think you left in shame." I didn't respond. I just drank. I wrote a letter that afternoon, one for Ethan, one for Lorraine, one for Cassandra, not to send, but to write, because I needed to get the words out of my bloodstream. I wrote in small, tight handwriting until my fingers ached. Each letter ended the same way. "You made me disappear. Now watch what happens when I return." I gave birth in a clinic that smelled like antiseptic and rain. The nurse who held my hand had a scar above her lip and a humming voice that reminded me of lullabies. No one was allowed in the room except her and the midwife. Milo waited in the hallway with a volunteer who fed him bits of turkey jerky from her purse. When my daughter finally arrived, silent at first, I thought the world had ended. Then she cried, sharp, angry, alive. They placed her on my chest, and I whispered her name into her hair. Her name wasn't for Ethan or Lorraine or anyone who had tried to erase her. It was mine, chosen in a whisper months earlier under a flickering bathroom light. Lila Wren Hart. Not a legacy, not a warning, just a girl born in defiance of silence. I stayed at the clinic for 3 days, longer than usual, because the birth had taken its toll. My body felt like glass held together by thread. But I held Lila through every hour of pain and fatigue. Milo slept at the foot of my bed, ears twitching each time I shifted. It was the first time I'd ever truly felt like someone's mother. Cleo arrived with supplies, diapers, a sling, hand-me-down onesies folded with care. "She's got fire," she said, holding Lila like she might ignite. I nodded. too tired to speak but grateful. Raina brought news that the Turners had filed a missing persons report. "It's performative," she said. The timing was suspicious. Apparently, Cassandra had been on a podcast, talking vaguely about grief and losses we don't talk about publicly. Ethan had posted a single black and white photo of a daffodil with no caption. Lorraine hadn't spoken publicly, but Raina's contact said she'd stopped attending her garden club. That last part made me smile. Their silence wasn't grief, it was guilt's cover band. I changed my number again. Cleo updated my documentation. Lila's birth certificate listed no father. It was safer that way. Not erasing the past, just refusing to let it name us. We moved to a small town tucked between pine forests and flat rivers that sparkled in the morning. The apartment had peeling linoleum and a cranky landlord who called everyone kiddo. I worked at a bookstore 2 mornings a week, restocking shelves while Lila slept in her sling. Milo guarded the front door like a sentry. The quiet felt earned. Lila was colicky for the first 4 months. Nights blurred into a haze of rocking, walking, humming, and crying that felt endless. I lost weight, then gained it back. My hands cracked from the cold, but when she smiled for the first time, crooked and sudden, it was enough to split open the world. I started documenting everything. Every photo, every weight check, every inch she grew. I printed copies and filed them into a binder labeled Heart Archive. It was insurance. It was a future weapon. It was proof that we existed. Raina told me I could stay hidden forever, if I wanted. "They'll forget," she said. "People like that don't hold on to ghosts." But I wasn't a ghost. I was a storm waiting for its time. And ghosts don't raise warriors. By Lila's first birthday, I'd started taking clients for custom baby clothing. Cleo helped set up a website, and I worked from my kitchen table under the warm buzz of a thrifted lamp. Word spread, and orders picked up. People liked the clean stitching and the softness. They liked that I didn't use patterns. I designed a line called The Wild Ones, each piece named after a bird. There was the jay jumper, the finch frock, the wren wrap. Lila modeled each one, always laughing, always wild-haired and barefoot. I sewed until my fingers were numb and my back ached from leaning over fabric. But it was honest work. Lorraine's name popped up in a news article a few weeks later. It was buried in a paragraph about a zoning battle involving an old historical estate. Lorraine Walsh Turner, a prominent figure in the neighborhood committee, declined to comment. I bookmarked the article. Cassandra had posted a new TEDx talk titled Resilience Through Suffering. I threw up in my mouth a little. Raina asked if I was ready to return. I said not yet. Lila was still small, and I hadn't saved enough to fight. "That day will come," she said, sipping her tea like prophecy. "And when it does, you'll already be holding the match." The first piece of Ethan's undoing arrived in a certified envelope. It was addressed to Lila Wren Hart, which meant someone had found our trail. But it wasn't threatening. It was legal. A summons. Inside was a petition for a financial audit of the Turner Family Trust. Ethan's signature was on the bottom, alongside a line item that mentioned, quote, "potential disputed inheritance." I read it twice, 3 times. Then I called Raina. "They're unraveling," she said, not surprised. "This happens when the center lies." She said it slowly, like quoting a poem. "He's digging because he's desperate." I wondered what had broken him, his wallet, or the truth. I didn't answer the summons. I didn't need to. It wasn't real. Not yet. Just a ghost knocking on the wrong door. I mailed it back with no return address and a single note tucked inside. "Ask Lorraine about the stairs." The second envelope came a month later, this time from an attorney named Bernard Steele. The name sounded like a 1940s detective. Inside was a letter offering discreet mediation, a veiled bribe pretending to be concerned. I shredded it and flushed it piece by piece. Milo watched in approval. Cleo warned me that they'd try one more time, louder. "People like that escalate when they feel powerless," she said. "They don't know how to lose quietly. I started checking the locks twice. The curtains stayed drawn, but I didn't feel fear. I felt ready. Lila learned to walk the next week, one wobbly foot after another, reaching for a stuffed owl she'd dropped under the table. Her laugh echoed through the apartment like a hymn. I caught her mid-step and lifted her to my chest. "You're the only legacy I care about," I whispered. She clapped like she understood. That night I reopened the Hart archive and added a new section, Phase 2. Phase 2 began with a burner phone and a list of names. I didn't reach out directly to Ethan, Lorraine, or Cassandra. I started with the people around them, their lawyer's assistant, Ethan's junior associate, Lorraine's bridge club acquaintance, people with just enough proximity to gossip but not enough power to protect secrets. I made sure each leak was polite, precise, and designed to sound like a whisper behind closed doors. It wasn't hard to find the cracks. Ethan had changed real estate firms twice in the last year, which looked bad in his industry. Lorraine's nonprofit had lost a donor mysteriously after a tip about, quote, mismanaged community funds. Cassandra had launched a new podcast called The Second Self, but it quietly shut down after 6 episodes due to internal disagreements. I wasn't aiming to ruin them, yet. I was just softening the ground. I signed Lila up for toddler gymnastics under a different name. We walked to the community center every Tuesday, hand in hand, past grocery stores that didn't know us, and strangers who smiled without recognition. I wore my hair differently and used tinted glasses. Milo wore a new harness and had learned not to bark when someone approached too quickly. We became a rhythm of safety. The third envelope arrived, this time hand-delivered to the bookstore, where I still worked part-time. My manager, Cheryl, handed it to me with a raised eyebrow. "Guy in a suit asked for you by your old name," she said, tone low but curious. "Told him no one by that name works here." I smiled and took the envelope with steady hands. Inside was a photo of Ethan, looking gaunt, standing next to a for sale sign in front of a house I didn't recognize. Tucked behind it was a typed message, "Please, just talk to me." I folded the photo in half, then in half again, until his face was gone. I didn't tear it. I wanted to remember. That evening, I looked up the address from the sign in the photo. It wasn't the Turner house. It was smaller, newer, and listed at a desperate price. Ethan had downsized. Lorraine, I learned from an obituary I hadn't expected to find, had died 2 months earlier. Stroke. No warning. The obituary was short and sanitized. No mention of children. No mention of charity work. Just Lorraine Walsh Turner, age 69, passed quietly in her home. Cassandra had posted a single sentence on social media. There are no words, but I could think of a few. I didn't feel joy, but I didn't feel sorrow either. Some endings simply are. I stared at Lorraine's face in the grainy photo attached to the obituary and whispered, "You didn't win." Then I deleted the tab and held Lila a little tighter that night, her breath warm against my collarbone. A week later, Cheryl told me the man had returned. "He asked if you had a daughter," she said carefully, "said he needed to know if she was safe." I didn't ask how he looked. I already knew. Tired, like someone who'd tried to erase history and ended up haunted by it. Raina warned me not to engage. "If you let him in, even a little, he'll try to rebuild from that crack," she said. But I wasn't afraid of Ethan anymore. He couldn't touch us, not where it counted. Still, I wanted to see how far he'd fall. So I replied, not to him, but through a burner email account I knew his firm's assistant would recognize. One sentence. "She's safe." "You're not forgiven," he responded within minutes. "Please, just 5 minutes. Anywhere. Anytime." I didn't respond for 2 days. Then I gave him a location. A public park across town. Sunday, 11 a.m., near the duck pond. I watched from a bench, sunglasses on, Lila in her stroller playing with a fabric book. Ethan arrived 5 minutes early, alone, looking smaller than I remembered. He scanned the area like a man waiting for a train that might never come. He sat on the far bench, his shoulders hunched, staring at the water. I didn't approach. I let him feel the space between us like a wall. After 15 minutes he stood, looked around one last time, and walked away. I let him disappear into the trees before pushing the stroller home. That night, I finally opened the last letter he'd sent. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a handwritten note. The check went through the shredder, the note I read once before burning. It ended with, "I was afraid, and I let that fear destroy everything." Fear is a choice, I wanted to write back. But I didn't waste the ink. Lila turned 2 with cupcakes, a balloon tied to Milo's collar, and a handmade dress with wildflowers stitched along the hem. Cleo brought a candle that smelled like lemon and lavender. Cheryl dropped off secondhand picture books and a stuffed fox. Raina didn't come, but she sent a framed photo of a phoenix embroidered in red and gold thread. "You are reborn," her note read. Cassandra finally reached out, through a podcast episode she didn't know I'd hear. It was titled Family Ghosts. She never said my name, but the story was clear. "Sometimes the people we lose choose not to come back," she said, voice silky and cold. "And sometimes we never deserved them to begin with." I listened once. Then again. Then a third time. And on that third listen, I heard it. Regret. Buried underperformance. A weakness. It was time. Phase 2 had been about survival. Phase 3 would be about truth. Not vengeance for the sake of pain, but for the record. For the story. For the girl who was pushed down the stairs and told to be quiet. I contacted an independent journalist known for exposing family scandals in affluent neighborhoods. Her name was Evie Tran, and she answered my anonymous tip with a single sentence: "I believe women." We met at a diner. I brought a binder, a photo of my bruised ribs, and a single note on Lorraine's stationery. "She's unstable," it read. "We need to prepare." Evie asked if I wanted anonymity. I said no. If the Turners wanted silence, they'd have to fight me for it. Lila deserved to grow up, knowing her mother didn't hide. She roared. Evie took everything. The photos, the hospital records, the audio clip of Lorraine after the fall, and treated it like holy text. She didn't sensationalize it or rush to publish. Instead, she spent 3 weeks cross-referencing timelines, verifying names, and speaking to hospital staff who remembered me as the quiet girl with the haunted eyes. I watched her build the story, piece by piece, brick by unforgiving brick, each one stacked with precision until the shape became undeniable. She reached out to Ethan for comment through his firm. He didn't reply, but the firm issued a vague statement about respecting privacy during emotionally complex times. Cassandra released a video the next day on her social media titled "Truth is Complicated." She wore a soft sweater and no makeup, a performance designed to soften the blow. "Families are flawed," she said, voice shaking just enough to feel rehearsed. Evie didn't include Cassandra's video in the story. "This isn't about spin," she told me. "It's about what they did and what you survived." The article was published on a Sunday morning, accompanied by a simple headline: "Pushed down the stairs for being pregnant. One woman's escape from silence." It ran in digital print first, then picked up by national syndicates. The world read it, and it didn't look away. People flooded the comments with outrage, support, and disbelief. Some questioned the story, demanded proof. Evie had included just enough redacted documentation to silence most doubters. A few commenters claimed I was chasing money, but most of them saw the truth. Within 48 hours, Ethan's firm placed him on indefinite leave pending internal review. Cassandra locked her social media accounts. A different nonprofit distanced itself from Lorraine's former foundation, citing, quote, "disturbing revelations." My old neighborhood's Facebook group started a thread that reached 200 comments before the admin shut it down. They'd all seen the name Lila Hart, and now they knew it. I walked through town the next day and felt the difference. No one pointed. No one asked for selfies. But the barista at the cafe handed me my order with a smile and said, "Good for you." An elderly man walking his schnauzer nodded as we passed. Visibility didn't feel like exposure. It felt like vindication. Cheryl printed out the article and taped it to the staff bulletin board. Under a heading she'd scrawled in Sharpie, "Hell yes." Cleo brought me a cake that just said loud in red frosting. I laughed so hard I cried. Milo barked until Lila fed him frosting under the table. For the first time in years, I felt celebrated without having to explain myself. 3 days later, Ethan showed up at the bookstore. He didn't come inside. Just stood across the street in a wrinkled coat, holding a single manila envelope. Cheryl noticed him before I did. "That one yours?" she asked, nodding through the glass. I stared for a long minute, then said, "Not anymore." I stepped outside, arms folded, keeping the door cracked behind me. Ethan didn't look angry or defeated, just hollow. "I'm not here to fight," he said, holding out the envelope. "There are things you deserve to know." I didn't take it. "I already know everything I need to," I said. He looked down at his shoes, then back up. "It wasn't supposed to happen that way," he whispered. "I didn't know what they were planning." I didn't flinch. "And when you did?" I asked. Silence was his only answer. He left the envelope on the bench and walked away without looking back. I waited until he turned the corner, then picked it up and slid it into my bag. That night, I opened it in the quiet of my apartment while Lila slept beside Milo's curled body. Inside were photos, ultrasounds, a framed wedding invitation I had forgotten existed, and a letter in Lorraine's handwriting. The last line stopped my heart. "She'll never belong to us." Not really, but we'll make sure she doesn't belong to anyone else either. I burned the letter in the sink with a match and watched the flame curl each word into black. The photos I kept. Not for Ethan, for Lila, when the time was right. Proof of what she came from and how far we had come. Evie's follow-up article ran the next week, titled "From Escape to Empowerment: What Survival Really Looks Like." This time, the photos were new, of me in my studio, of Lila in my lap, of Milo mid-yawn under the sewing table. The story wasn't about what happened to me. It was about what I'd built. Orders for the Wild Ones doubled in 48 hours. A boutique in Vermont wanted to carry the line. A podcast invited me to speak on reclaiming narrative. I declined for now, not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't finished speaking in my own language yet. Cleo helped me draft the legal paperwork to formally change Lila's last name to Hart. It wasn't about hiding anymore. It was about claiming. "She's yours," Cleo said, handing me the notarized forms, start to finish. Milo got a new collar with a tag that read, "Guardian." Cheryl framed the first dress I ever sold and hung it above the bookstore's kids section. Lila said her first full sentence, "Mama made it pretty," while pointing to a sundress on a mannequin. My world had collapsed once. Now it bloomed. But peace doesn't mean stillness. That's what Evie reminded me when she called again with news. The Turner estate was facing probate court. Lorraine had amended her will 6 months before her death. The original beneficiary was Lila, listed under her birth alias. If no one claimed it, the estate would default to a charitable trust. "They're going to fight it," Evie warned. "Hard." I didn't panic. I opened my file cabinet and pulled out the Hart archive. Every document, every date, every name, and beneath it all, a DNA test I'd kept for 2 years. Sealed. I stared at the envelope for a long time. Then I opened it. "Before I narrate what happens next, kindly let me know what city or country you're watching from and why you haven't subscribed yet." The DNA test confirmed what I already knew, but had never spoken aloud. Ethan was Lila's biological father with a 99.999% probability. I'd done the test during my second week at the safe house, when fear still wrapped around my ribs like a second skin. Raina had told me to keep every option open, every truth documented. Now that slip of paper had transformed from evidence to ammunition. I handed a copy to Evie and tucked the original back into the Hart archive. "They can contest all they want," I said, "but biology doesn't bend for legacy." She looked at me like I was a general walking onto a battlefield I had already mapped. "They're not going to see it coming," she whispered. Probate court scheduled a preliminary hearing 2 weeks out. Clayton Hendress, the same lawyer who once defended the Turners, resigned from their case and quietly sent me a message through Evie. "I believe you now," he wrote. "I should have then." I didn't reply. Some forgiveness doesn't deserve words. Ethan's new attorney filed a petition to block Lila's claim, citing emotional instability of the mother and intentional parental alienation. They referenced my disappearance, our lack of contact, and a list of psychiatric diagnoses I'd never received. But their strongest claim, the one they clung to like a shield, was the narrative that I had faked the fall, that I had chosen isolation over healing. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Priya Bhatt, dismantled that claim before the first hearing ended. She presented hospital records, photographs of my injuries, and audio recordings of Lorraine's language, coded but unmistakably cruel. "This isn't alienation," Priya said. "This is survival." The judge didn't rule that day, but the tone shifted. You could feel it in the silence. Cassandra didn't attend the hearing, but she released a statement through her publicist. "My family has suffered deeply from the ongoing attacks on our reputation," it read. "We ask for privacy and fairness as we navigate these tragic misunderstandings." The word misunderstandings echoed like a slur. She still thought she was the victim. That told me everything I needed to know. The next court date was set for 30 days later, enough time for depositions and disclosures. Ethan requested visitation rights, pending outcome of the estate hearing. My stomach turned at the wording. Not fatherhood, not involvement. Visitation, as if Lila were a piece of furniture to be shared. Priya leaned across her desk and said, "We can deny this, but they'll push harder." I nodded. "Let them push," I said. "I don't bend anymore." And I meant it. Milo sensed the tension before Lila could. He slept curled under her crib again, even though she now slept in a toddler bed. His ears twitched at every knock, every creak. Lila didn't notice. She spent her afternoons drawing stars with pink markers and asking questions about clouds. I made her a new dress the night before the next hearing. Deep blue with silver threads sewn like constellations across the hem. She twirled in it while singing a song with no real melody. Priya asked if I wanted to bring her to court. "She doesn't need to see them," I said. "They don't deserve her presence." The second hearing went nuclear. Evie attended with a press badge, though she promised not to write until the judgment came in. Ethan wore a navy suit that fit him worse than it used to. Cassandra finally appeared, flanked by a new lawyer and an assistant who looked terrified. Their legal team tried to introduce a psychiatric expert who had never evaluated me in person. Priya objected before the man could speak. "I'll say this once," she told the judge. "We have real documentation, real injuries, real timelines. They have speculation and shame." When the judge sustained her objection, Cassandra's lawyer nearly choked on his own words. Ethan looked like he wanted to vanish into the floor. We submitted Lila's DNA test, her birth certificate, my own employment records, and every milestone logged in real time. Photos, videos, receipts. A paper trail so long and unbroken that even the court clerk looked impressed. They hadn't expected me to have this much truth. The Turners' team claimed Lorraine's will was emotionally compromised and not intended to be enforceable. But the estate's executor, a distant cousin named Harold who had never liked Lorraine's politics, testified under oath that the will had been validated and witnessed twice. She wanted the child to have everything, Harold said, and she knew what her son was. That was the moment the courtroom changed. Ethan's face crumpled, not in grief but in defeat. Cassandra looked straight at me for the first time, her mouth a perfect line of disapproval. The judge called for a recess and reminded both parties that additional defamation attempts would be punished with sanctions. Evie passed me a folded napkin with a single word on it. Almost. It felt like breathing underwater and finally finding the surface. The official decision came 10 days later. Lila was declared the rightful heir to the Turner estate, including all properties, trust accounts, and holdings under Lorraine's name. Ethan was denied visitation pending a psychological evaluation and a long-term parenting plan to be reviewed after 6 months. Cassandra was ordered to cease any public discussion of the case or risk additional litigation. The ruling was firm, final. I read the decision out loud to Lila in our living room, Milo resting his chin on her foot. She didn't understand most of it, but when I reached the final sentence, "The child shall retain full legal access to her inherited legacy," she clapped and said, "Mama, you won." I laughed through my tears. "No, baby," I whispered. "We did." I didn't move into the Turner house. I donated it to a women's refuge, with the condition that the front staircase be torn out and replaced with an elevator. Priya said it was poetic. I said it was practical. I never wanted anyone else to fall in that house again. The money changed things, yes, but it didn't change us. I still worked at the bookstore twice a week, though Cheryl now insisted on paying me more. The boutique thrived, and I hired 2 assistants. Cleo taught me how to invest. Raina taught me how to rest. I opened a trust for Lila that would grow with her. But I didn't tell her about it. Not yet. I wanted her to know trees before she knew banks, skies before signatures. She still wore secondhand shoes. Still asked if the stars could hear her. When Evie's final article came out, it was titled, "The Girl Who Didn't Disappear." I cried when I read the closing paragraph. She was pushed down the stairs and told to vanish. Instead, she rose, and she built a home on higher ground. A month after the court ruling, a letter arrived with no return address. It was handwritten in slanted cursive on cream-colored paper that smelled faintly of perfume. I recognized Cassandra's handwriting immediately. The letter was exactly 4 lines long. "You may have won, but you've ruined us. There's nothing left. I hope your daughter grows up kinder than you." I didn't respond. I read it once, then slid it into the back of the hard archive without comment. It wasn't an apology. It was a woman choking on consequences she never imagined would touch her. Cassandra had always lived in a world where words were weapons and consequences belonged to other people. That world was gone now, and I didn't mourn it. Lila began preschool in the fall, a little canvas backpack bouncing against her spine, her curls tied with a ribbon I'd stitched myself. She told the teacher her favorite color was bright. Not red, not yellow, just bright. Milo waited at the gate every day at 2:30 sharp, his ears perked for the sound of her laugh. Our life moved forward in gentle rhythms, never flashy, never rushed, but deeply ours. I kept working at the boutique, though now it was more than just children's clothes. We expanded into ceremonial garments, flower girl dresses, baptism outfits, even small tailored suits. I named the new line Heirloom. Every stitch felt like stitching a scar into something sacred. The waiting list grew longer than I ever expected. One afternoon, while reorganizing the storage shelves, I found the photo of Ethan at the duck pond bench. Folded, faded, and forgotten in the bottom of a drawer. I didn't shred it. I didn't burn it. I just looked at it for a moment, then slipped it into a folder labeled Unfinished Lessons. Raina invited me to speak at a panel on survival and advocacy. At first I declined, but she called back 3 days later and said, "There's a girl in the audience who needs to hear from someone who lived." So I went. I wore a navy dress stitched with silver thread and brought Milo with me for courage. The room was quiet when I finished speaking. No applause, no questions, just quiet. Then someone stood up in the back and said, "I didn't think I'd make it through this year, but I think I will now." And that was enough. I smiled through the lump in my throat. It felt like releasing something I hadn't realized I was still holding. The next morning, I found a bouquet of sunflowers on my doorstep with a note that said, "Thank you for standing." There was no name. I tucked the note into a book and placed the flowers in the window. Lila pointed to them and said, "They look like little suns." She was right. Cleo moved into a new apartment 2 floors above mine. She'd started seeing someone. An artist who painted trees and didn't mind that she kept 10 pairs of scissors in her kitchen drawer. They became our family too. Lila called her Auntie, and the artist taught her how to mix watercolors on weekends. Milo liked him immediately, which was all the endorsement I needed. One evening, I opened the safe in the back of my closet and pulled out the last sealed envelope. Inside was a second DNA test, one that hadn't been used in court. Not for Ethan. For Lorraine. It had been done without her knowledge, a precaution Raina insisted on while I was still pregnant. I'd never looked at the results until now. The test confirmed that Lorraine was Ethan's biological mother. But something else caught my eye in the fine print. There was a genetic marker flagged, a hereditary mutation that could impact cardiovascular health. I stared at the screen, then cross-referenced it with the stroke listed on Lorraine's death certificate. It matched. I printed the page and added it to Lila's medical folder. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about vigilance. Knowing where we came from didn't mean we had to become it, but it meant we could prepare. The day Lila turned 4, we visited a lake outside the city. She wore a crown of daisies and tossed breadcrumbs into the water, laughing as ducks swarmed around her boots. I watched her from a bench, hands wrapped around a cup of cocoa, Milo curled beside me. The sun glinted off the water like a mirror for all the versions of myself I'd shed to get here. I didn't feel lost anymore. Later that week, I received a phone call from a law office in another state. The Turner family had quietly sold a vacation property, unaware that it was part of the estate still under Lila's name. Priya handled it with swift elegance, issuing a cease and desist and freezing their access to the remaining accounts. "They keep forgetting she's not a ghost," Priya said. "She's a beneficiary." A month passed without another letter or call. Then one morning, Cheryl handed me an envelope with no return address again. Inside was a single photo, Cassandra on a stage accepting some award, her smile rigid and empty. The back read, "Legacy doesn't always mean love." I didn't know if it was meant for me or for herself. I let it fall into the recycling bin without a second glance. Lila learned to ride a bike by the end of spring, training wheels abandoned after 3 practice runs. Milo chased after her with uncontainable joy, barking every time she wobbled and cheered when she didn't fall. I stitched her a new jacket to celebrate, embroidered with a phoenix in gold thread on the back. "Why that bird?" she asked. I kissed her forehead and said, "Because it always comes back stronger." I didn't return to court again. I didn't need to. The estate remained intact, and the family no longer contested it. Ethan's name faded from the paperwork like an old watermark. Cassandra stayed quiet. Every so often, someone new would email me, someone who had read the article or heard the story secondhand. "How did you do it?" they'd ask. I never had a perfect answer, but I always started the same way, by not disappearing. Summer rolled in with heat that stuck to our skin like honey, and Lila spent most afternoons barefoot in the garden behind our apartment. Cleo built her a raised planter box, and together they grew tomatoes, basil, and snap peas. Milo stayed close by, ears twitching whenever bees got too near. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours, sun-drenched and sweet, like a lullaby in motion. I stitched Lila a wide-brimmed hat with her name on the underside, so she'd always remember who she belonged to. The boutique expanded again, this time into a neighboring storefront that had once been a hardware shop. I painted the walls myself, soft green with gold trim, and hung framed thank you notes from clients above the register. Cheryl helped me draft the business plan, and Cleo sourced fabric from a co-op of women in Guatemala. I named the new wing Bright Things, after Lila's favorite word. She twirled in the front window while I arranged gowns on mannequins. One Tuesday morning, a letter arrived from a legal aid clinic in the city. It wasn't from Ethan or Cassandra, but from a woman who claimed to be Lorraine's half-sister. Her name was Judith, and her handwriting was shaky but formal. "I know what she did," the letter began. "I couldn't stop her then, but I'd like to help now." I read it twice before showing Priya. We agreed to meet in a public cafe downtown, with Priya sitting 2 tables over just in case. Judith was in her 70s, thin and wiry, with steel gray hair and a tight bun and a voice that didn't quiver once. "Lorraine was always controlling," she said, sipping weak tea. "But when Ethan married you, she turned cruel." I didn't correct her. I just listened. Judith handed me a folder with notes Lorraine had sent her over the years. Snide remarks, cold assessments, and eventually, desperate fears. "She was terrified you'd take something from her," Judith said. "But she never understood you were never after her legacy. You were just trying to survive." I exhaled slowly, grateful for truth, even if it came late. Inside the folder was something else, a scanned copy of Lorraine's first draft of the will. In it, she'd left everything to Ethan with a footnote. Unless rendered incapable of producing an heir. The phrasing made my stomach lurch. Lorraine had known about his infertility long before I did. She'd weaponized that knowledge quietly, strategically, and permanently. I thanked Judith for coming and offered to pay for her tea. She waved me off. "Just raise your girl right," she said. "Break the line." Milo nudged my hand as we left, as if to remind me that some chains had already been broken. That night, I sat on the fire escape with Lila curled on my lap, her fingers sticky from melted ice cream. She asked why the stars didn't fall. I told her because they're anchored by truth. "Like trees?" she asked. "Stronger," I said. "Stars don't bend to storms." By fall, the story had stopped trending. New headlines replaced old ones, and the Turner name faded from public memory. Cassandra had quietly moved out of state, and Ethan resigned from his firm entirely. Rumors said he was consulting for smaller businesses now, under a different name. I didn't care to verify. Lila asked once if she had a dad. Not with sadness, just curiosity. I took her hand and told her what she needed for now. "You have people who love you," I said. "And one day, we'll talk about everything else." Milo aged faster than I expected. His muzzle grayed and his pace slowed, but his spirit never dimmed. He still followed Lila from room to room, still curled up beside her crib-turned bed each night. The vet said his heart was strong, but warned us time was precious. We made the most of it. I wrote again, not for court, not for records, but for myself. A letter to the version of me who had once believed love would be enough to erase generational cruelty. I described the fall, the silence, the bruises that faded slower than trust. I described the girl who stood up anyway. And I signed it. She didn't disappear. Cleo read the letter and asked if she could include it in a small anthology she was curating, stories by women who had survived erasure and come out sharper. I agreed. It felt right to let my voice echo where silence had once thrived. The book was titled Weightless No More. Lila called it the Mama Book. The boutique won an award from a regional fashion council for its commitment to ethical sourcing and storytelling through design. They asked me to speak at the gala. I wore a suit I'd stitched myself, simple, strong, with copper thread at the seams. When I stood at the podium, I didn't thank Ethan or Cassandra or even Lorraine. I thanked the staircase for showing me exactly who I would never become. I ended the speech with a quote that wasn't mine, but felt like it had been stitched into my skin. "When they try to bury you, remember, you're a seed." The room fell silent, then erupted. Later that night, Lila wore my award medal around her neck and declared herself Queen of all buttons. Milo barked once in agreement, then fell asleep with his head in her lap. The next day, a letter came from the state's Department of Family Affairs. It wasn't about custody or disputes. It was a formal request to consider serving on a newly established advisory board for survivors of family-based abuse. "Your case set a precedent," the letter read. "We believe your voice would guide others to safety." I didn't hesitate. I accepted the invitation and attended the first meeting in a room full of scarred but standing women. We built plans, not just protections. Programs for safe escape, resources for legal literacy, a future where silence wasn't the default. One woman, Shonda, told me she'd escaped after reading my story online late one night while sitting in a locked bathroom. "You didn't know me," she said, "but you gave me permission." That night I cried not from grief, but from recognition. Our stories were lifeboats, passed hand to hand in the dark. That winter, the cold came early, frosting the windows by late October and biting through even the thickest of coats. Lila took to wearing two scarves, one knitted by Cleo, the other a pink one she insisted Milo picked. He tolerated the extra warmth without complaint, curling into tighter circles at her feet during story time. His eyes grew cloudier, his breathing a bit slower, but he still wagged his tail when she laughed. I started writing down the things he'd done for us, the things Lila might forget, but I never would. One morning I woke to find Milo not beside Lila's bed, but by the front door, unmoving but peaceful. His leash was still hooked on the wall, his tag resting quiet on the floor beneath him. Lila knew before I said a word. She sat beside him, petting his side with small, steady hands. "He waited until we were safe," she whispered. We buried Milo in the garden, behind the boutique, beside the raised beds where Lila had first planted her wildflowers. Cleo painted a stone with gold paw prints and wrote, "Guardian, friend, family." That night I lit a candle on the fire escape and sat in the cold with my knees pulled to my chest. I whispered thank you to the sky, to the stairs he'd walked with me, to every bark that had ever warned me something was wrong. The silence he left behind was shaped like safety. Spring returned slowly, as it always does, like a friend unsure if they're welcome. I planted daffodils this time, bright, yellow, unapologetic. Lila said they looked like joy and named each one. The boutique received a bulk order from a regional school district that wanted formal attire for foster children graduating from elementary programs. I sewed through the night for weeks, fueled by tea and soft music and the promise of ceremony. One of the kids sent a crayon drawing of herself in a lavender dress I'd made. Underneath it read, "I felt like I mattered." I framed it in the front window of Bright Things, right next to a photo of Lila holding a tomato from her first harvest. That drawing was worth more than every award and every article. It was a sentence Lorraine Turner never could have written. And that, more than anything, was the true inheritance. Cheryl offered to host a small party for the boutique's 4th anniversary. I agreed, on one condition. We celebrate the people who helped me build. No press, no speeches. Just food, music, and chairs dragged into the street to watch the sun set. Cleo made lemonade, and Lila wore a crown made of buttons. At some point during the party, a man stepped onto the sidewalk across from the boutique. He didn't speak, didn't wave, didn't come closer. Just stood there with his hands in his pockets, watching. I knew it was Ethan before I saw his face, and I knew why he was there. Priya had told me he was still seeking mediation. He wanted a conversation before Lila grew older and began asking questions. I'd never responded. Now, standing there with his posture uncertain, it was clear he'd come not to demand, but to witness. And I allowed it. I didn't approach him, but I met his gaze and nodded once. Acknowledgement, not forgiveness. He nodded back, then turned and walked away into the falling dusk. Lila never saw him. She was too busy dancing with the neighbor's dog and singing to the moon. Ethan had chosen absence when it counted. Presence now didn't undo that. The next week, a letter arrived from Cassandra. This time not anonymous, not cryptic. Just a printed card. No frills, no performance. Inside, "I don't expect a response, but I read your story again, and I see it now. You were never the threat. We were." I placed the card in a drawer, unsure if it belonged with the rest. That drawer, unlike the Hart archive, was filled with things I never wanted to reopen. I kept it for balance, not to dwell, but to remember. You don't grow stronger by forgetting the fire. You grow stronger by learning how to walk through it without burning again. And I had learned. Lila started drawing pictures of Milo with wings. "He watches me from the sky," she explained. "He still guards." I smiled and said nothing. Her memory, untainted by cruelty, was the greatest victory of all. No one had rewritten her beginning. Raina reached out again to ask if I'd consider helping with a new mentorship initiative, pairing women who had left abusive homes with others who'd already rebuilt. "It's not counseling," she said. "It's witness." I agreed. We all need someone who knows the dark corners and can still describe the light. The first woman I mentored was younger than I'd expected. Her name was Imani, and she had a 6-month-old named Jordan who clung to her like breath. She didn't cry when she told her story, but when I told mine, she did. "You made it sound like a map," she said, "and I've been walking in circles." I drew her a floor plan. Literally, her apartment, the closest bus stop, a list of grocery stores that accepted WIC without judgment. "This is your new house," I said, pointing to the center. "And this time, no stairs that can be used against you." She laughed through tears. "You get it," she whispered. One afternoon, Lila found my old wedding ring in a jewelry box at the bottom of my closet. She brought it to me, eyes wide. "Is this yours?" she asked. I turned it over in my hand, remembering the weight of promises made by people who never intended to keep them. "It was," I said, "but not anymore." We took it to a jeweler Cleo knew and had it melted down into a pendant in the shape of a quill. Lila wore it under her dresses sometimes, pressed warm against her skin. "It helps me write my stories," she said. She had no idea how true that was, that gold no longer belonged to the Turner name, it belonged to the next chapter. I finally visited Milo's grave again that spring, Lila beside me, with a paper flower she'd made in art class. We knelt together, hands in the soil, silence between us not empty but full. "I think he knows we're okay," she whispered. "He knows," I replied, and I believed it. By the time Lila turned 6, she could read chapter books on her own and tie her shoes without help. She liked science and stories about animals who talked, especially foxes with clever plans. She'd begun asking more questions, deeper ones, the kind that don't come from cartoons or picture books. One evening after dinner, she looked up from her drawing and asked, "Was my dad a bad man?" I set down my tea slowly and met her eyes with steady breath. "No," I told her, "but he made choices that hurt people and then chose not to fix them." She nodded, quiet for a moment, then said, "Okay," before going back to her drawing. I didn't tell her the full story, not yet. But I gave her a version shaped by clarity, not bitterness. She deserved to build her truth brick by honest brick, not have it thrown at her like rubble. Later that night, I added a new section to the Hart archive, labeled "For Lila's Eyes." Inside, I placed a letter addressed to her on her 18th birthday, along with documents she might one day want to see. I included my own reflections, not just facts, who I was when it all happened, and how hard it had been to become someone new. "You are not their redemption," I wrote. "You are my revolution." Cleo read the letter and said, "It's a map, not a mirror." I smiled at that. Lila wasn't a reflection of the Turner name, or of Ethan's absence, or of Lorraine's legacy. She was her own beginning, one stitched from resilience and love and homemade dresses. Even her scars, if they ever came, would be her own, not inherited. We hosted a spring fair in front of the boutique that year, complete with lemonade stands and a storytelling corner for kids. Cheryl read old fairy tales while Cleo sold hand-dyed ribbons and bookmarks. I set up a small display called Stories We Wear, showcasing dresses and suits inspired by real clients. One tiny suit bore a tag that read, "For the boy who testified." Another, "For the girl who crossed the street alone and didn't look back." We didn't sell those pieces. They stayed on display, stitched with memory. Lila helped me organize fabric swatches and chose colors for the next season's line. "I want to call it Unbreakable," she said, folding a navy bolt of cotton against a crimson one. I kissed her temple and said, "Perfect." The line sold out in the first week. People didn't just want clothing. They wanted something born from survival. One afternoon in June, I received a certified letter, postmarked from Ethan's new city. Inside was a trust release form and a typed note. "I have no right to ask anything of you, but I hope one day she'll know I never stopped thinking of her." No request for contact, no hint of redemption. I forwarded the trust form to Priya, who confirmed everything had been signed cleanly, with no lingering clauses. "He's finally letting go," she said. "It took him long enough." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Weeks later, I found a sealed manila envelope left at the boutique with my name in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a photo of Lorraine, younger, holding a baby I assumed was Ethan. Attached was a note from Judith. "Even monsters were babies once. That doesn't make them innocent, but it helps us break the pattern." I placed the photo in the drawer with Cassandra's final card and a clipping of Lorraine's obituary. They didn't belong in the Hart archive. That was a record of growth, not rot. Still, I kept them, because healing doesn't mean forgetting. One crisp morning in October, I stood at the top of the staircase in the community center where I volunteered now. It was a narrow set of stairs, old wood, creaky but stable. I looked down, hand on the railing, and didn't flinch. I walked down slowly, firmly, not as a victim of stairs, but as someone who now chose how and when she descended. That moment stayed with me longer than I expected. Lila entered second grade that fall and came home one day asking what resilience meant. I told her it was like bending without breaking. She nodded, then bent herself backward into a bridge position on the living room rug. "Like this?" she asked. I laughed so hard, I cried. Exactly like that. Our lives settled into a rhythm, the kind that grows from nothing but soil and time. We had quiet mornings, messy afternoons, and peaceful dinners with stories told in overlapping voices. I never stopped writing, though now I wrote fiction, short stories, some inspired by old truths. The characters didn't always survive, but they always transformed. And transformation, I had learned, was its own kind of triumph. Raina invited me to guest lecture at a university women's studies course. The theme was reclamation through story. I told them about Lorraine and Cassandra, about the Turner name and how it meant nothing in the end. I told them about a staircase, and a dog named Milo, and a child who turned sorrow into brightness. And then I told them the real ending. I never needed revenge. I just needed freedom. A student in the front row raised her hand and asked, "Would you do anything differently?" I paused. "Maybe," I said. But every time I try to rewrite the story in my head, I end up back here, with my daughter alive, with my name intact, and with people like you listening. So no, I wouldn't change a word. That night, Lila asked if I remembered being sad. I said yes, but only to understand joy better. "Like the stars?" she asked. "Brighter because of the dark?" I nodded. She always saw the whole sky. The last thing I added to the Heart archive was a page labeled Final Entry. On it, I wrote only this: "They pushed me down the stairs for being pregnant. I disappeared, then served my revenge cold." Underneath that, I scribbled a footnote in the margin. But what came after wasn't revenge. It was rebirth. Thank you for listening to Norah's story. If you're yet to subscribe, please consider doing so before watching another story on the channel.